Welcome on in, everybody. I brought notes for sure to this one. Every Vlogmas, I like to kind of do a movie-related thing, and let's look at 6 different versions of basically the same story and get curious a little bit maybe as to why A Christmas Carol impacted an entire generation for whom it was not even written. See you here in a little bit.
Tis the season to be jolly. La 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 la. Don we now our gay apparel. La 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 la. Troll the ancient Yuletide carol. La 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 la.
Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol, Mickey's Christmas Carol, A Christmas Carol from 1984, Scrooged, The Muppet Christmas Carol, and the 2009 version of The Christmas Carol. What all do they have in common? Well, other than they all use the same public domain item as their inspiration for their script, they basically took a study of the human condition and ripped it apart in so many different pros and cons. Hello there, everybody. My name is Jenna O'Malley. I am your soul writer, author of sci-fi fantasy with dashes of romance and nerdy references. Alongside the raw healing stories my characters and the Myrna annals do weave throughout time and space, I get together with soul bards such as yourselves, and we go on through our writing journeys together, one pace, one time, one step in front of the other, and wow, sometimes that includes looking at what is considered a masterpiece that gets ripped apart and reorganized. I did not realize until I started to do this vlog how many different versions of this book there are in production, let alone how many movies or TV shows or cartoon takes there are on this production. We're looking at 6 out of many today, probably the 6 most common ones that everybody knows. And hello to everyone who's hanging out with me on Wednesdays. Yes, I'm streaming this during a sprint. Hello, hello. I hope you're all doing really well. I hope you're all doing really great. Let's go ahead and I might get this all filmed in one sprint, maybe 2. Let's see. So we're going to take each of the movies in order that they were produced, published, given to the world, and look at their pros, their cons, what they did good for the story, what they did bad for the story. Now, I know there are other versions that were made prior to Mr. Magoo's version, which came out in 1962. I am quite well aware that there are several versions of the black and white, non-color live action, non-animated variety that did not make this list. I grew up watching most of them because my mother and my brothers were addicted to these movies, to the retelling of Scrooge's story again and again and again and again and again. And when I got picking out what movie-themed vlog to do for Vlogmas, a conversation from a previous student came to mind, where their essay on a read-through of a play version of A Christmas Carol pointed out that this story does not technically have anything other than a timeless audience. And I was like, maybe in retrospect, realizing that's why it got remade so much, especially during like slightly before and the decades during my childhood and teenage and young adult years. And this story is dark. It looks at human morality and psychology before words for what Scrooge is that we have now today technically even were known or widely accepted psychologically and socially speaking. He was just called a miser, a miserable old crotchety man who just wants his money and get off my lawn kind of mode, to make him a little bit of an Americanized version even. But he's kind of an every person. I don't even want to say every man, because I'm certain there are versions of this story that exist with a female version of Scrooge. I didn't go there for consistency's sake. So we can just talk about kind of a similar Scrooge in slightly different variations of plus or minus the original Scrooge in varied situations of plus or minus the period it was set in, and varied perspectives of plus or minus what gets to stay in the plot. Okay? Most of us know that the era Charles Dickens wrote this and a lot of his literature on was highly commentary based. If you have never read something other than A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, former English teacher me says you should add something by him to your reading list. We're still going through a lot of the things that he talks about in those books is why. Anyway, on that note, yes, we're having fun testing what the mic can do. Sorry, video editor, I adore you. So let's start with chronologically, which one's first on my list? Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol, 1962. This is a version all of my siblings and I grew up with, and I think it's the only version of the cartoon that all 5 of us had. Mind you, my eldest brother was born in the 60s. For George, Joe, and Dennis, I was born in the 80s. Hence the 20-year age gap. So, referring to the notes, shall we? Pros for Mr. Magoo. Comedic. I mean, it is Mr. Magoo. If you know that franchise, you know there's a reason why they picked the actor they did to play him in the live action version in the last 2 decades. Just saying. It's very musical. It is actually, in my opinion, the first of the cartoon ones that leans into American musical theater as part of the storytelling. And it's not yet a Disney property. I don't believe Mr. Magoo was, I could be wrong. I didn't check my facts on this part. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment box, or accurate, I guess, confirm. Mr. Magoo, I don't believe was a Disney property at the time. We don't get a Disney property until our next item on our list. Therefore, given its Mr. Magoo, given its musicality, it's highly approachable for young kids. Like, out of all of them on this list, including the Muppet version and the Mickey version, Mr. Magoo's takes this story the lightest and the brightest. The color palette is the lightest and the brightest, in my opinion. And it really leans into the comedy of the Mr. Magoo franchise. You get much, much, much less tonal downplay on things like Tiny Tim's illness and the fact that if Scrooge doesn't change, he's going to end up being alone in the end, all the way through his life. And the era where it became this is also the era where it became a school thing, I think, because we had a short half an hour-ish version that we could show to kids on a day before a winter break occurs. Mr. Magoo's version was something my brothers watched in school, and they would talk about it comparatively, okay? So definitely you can see here where it introduced kids at like 1st, 2nd grade levels into human morality concepts, maybe in a safe way. I know my brothers and I talked a lot about Mr. Magoo versus the Muppets. More on that here in a little bit in that regard. So therefore, the cons of Mr. Magoo is, if that's the only version you've seen, you do not understand half of the moral weight of the story for A Christmas Carol. You have taken but a sneeze, not a splash, into the plot, into the psychological, social pond that is this story. Therefore, I would venture to say, if you are a parent wanting to introduce classical Yuletide stories to your children and you want to go the route of Scrooge, start with Mr. Magoo and then go to Mickey's Christmas Carol. This came out on my 2nd Christmas, and I weirdly remember that Christmas, and it's not a picture. It's not me remembering a picture that my mom took. This is the first Christmas where I have very, very, very fuzzy memories. Super fuzzy. Like, I've got 30 seconds maybe in my head max of a complete scene. Broken up. But I remember the smells of that day. My brother George had spilt coffee in the kitchen, and the house reeked of dark roast coffee, which was his coffee at the time. The house reeked of my cousin Georgie Lee's battle fatigues that were soaking in a tub in the basement, because that was the first Christmas where he was in the Navy, was when I was 2. And I very much remember opening up Mickey's Christmas Carol that morning, and like around that season afterwards that it came out, being obsessed with it. And yeah, that's it. It's a much more, I would say, Y7. If you were to use an ESRB rating here on the different versions, I would give Mr. Magoo an E for everyone. And I would give Mickey's Christmas Carol a Y7 only because it does not play as nicely or as fast and loose with some of the morality things. And it lets the moments that linger about the concept of life versus not being alive in a way that someone age 7 and older might easier understand. Psychologically, developmentally, we're told that's about when children start understanding a hard concept for what grief is and what the passing of a loved one is anyway, is around that plus or minus middle to upper elementary groove. So yeah, I would definitely let the Mickey be for elementary kids, not preschool kids. For that reason, unless they're a very mature kid. The palette on this one is also darker for a Disney movie compared to previous Disney princess movies that had just come out recently, had more like Snow White, a darker palette. Okay. Disney was learning what audiences and age groups are okay to kind of play with those colors safely again. And this is one of, in my opinion, one of their prime examples of allowing the color palette to work for that undertone of the plot's context very well. I also definitely, looking at the notes, making sure we're on track with time. Yes, we are. I definitely also agree that this is going to be the one where the Cratchit scenes were also allowed to hit home the hardest. And I think this was Disney playing even more on the headcanon of their viewers. Mind you, Scrooge McDuck is the one who plays Ebenezer Scrooge. And a lot of us know from the Disney headcanon that he has nephews, multiple. He has, you know, everybody's favorite Donald, but he has little kid nephews. Huey, Dewey, and Louie probably are about Tiny Tim's age. When I realized that around the age of 10, that messed with my head so much. Like literally, I asked my dad and he looked at me with these huge bug eyes like, she's right. But we let that character get away with it, him being a little darker, because it hit that much closer to home in the headcanon. So well done on you in retrospect there, Disney. The con for this one's obviously going to be oversimplification. Scrooge McDuck versus Mr. Magoo helps it, but you know, you tone down the comedy to be a little bit more dark comedy, and I definitely would say Scrooge McDuck is more dark comedy than Mr. Magoo, but then your Marley is played by Goofy in this case. Yeah, hooey indeed. So, also the fact that the runtime is still rather short, so you kind of got to compromise some plot elements just a tiny bit. Pros to our first live action on our list. This is the one that everyone kind of hails as the masterpiece of masterpieces for the live action version, the 1984 version. And I think it's because it's the first color live action version, in my opinion, disagree with me in the comments if you do, that really went more period accurate, more story accurate, more macabre, more somber. But it's therefore also the reason why a lot of people who have seen the lighter hearted ones and grew up with those items plus the next one on our list don't really agree with it all that much. The 1984 version definitely takes a lot of the comedy. It goes 180 in the face of all of the others aforementioned. Okay. It flies in the face of all of them on making it more approachable. This is the one that I would say is your rated PG-13 or up. I would definitely make sure that kids have the maturity to grasp, understand the nuanced differences between the different cinematic versions at this point. I do love, though, that this is the one that is more theatrically going to be the one everyone loves. But the super con is, I think it's also the most underappreciated for the fact that it tried to take the story back to what it was after some more lighthearted plays on it. And then, of course, a couple years later, Scrooge had to take that lightheartedness and Bill Murray kicked it to the curb. So the pros of Scrooge, again, brings it back to a more approachable audience. I would probably keep this one more PG with a more mature child because some of the jokes are adulty. But I also like that the Scrooged version combines that whole Groundhog Day concept a little bit. And I like that it kind of like the Muppet version will, in about a decade, half a decade or so from when this one comes out, it doesn't mind playing with slapstick next to dark and interchanging those humors. I think had it been any other actor than Bill Murray, it wouldn't have worked out. Now, mind you, because of Bill Murray's comedy, it works out and it makes sense. But unfortunately, that's where the cons come in. It can be definitely an up, down, up, down, up, down tonal roller coaster. And if you're not used to that kind of catharsis in any kind of holiday movie, Scrooged is not going to be a preferred movie for you in this version particularly. And of course, the fact that it cuts out entire characters and it's very, 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 very much loosely based on the plot. Now let's talk about my favorite version, shall we? You know what this means. 'Tis the season to be jolly and joyous. One of my favorite versions of all time is, of course, the Muppet version, which came out in the early 90s. And this is the version of my childhood, I guess you could really truly say. And this is the one that my brothers and I would talk and compare the different Scrooge versions about the most. My brother George often pointed out that the Muppet version is probably the most balanced of the live actions, meaning that it's not afraid to go dark. There's a certain song that they won't play on certain streaming platforms because it's too heartbreaking and too realistic to some people's lives. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Hello, Locarina of Time. Are you going to come over here and join us by chance, little girl? Is your stool up to the top too far away? Let's remedy that, shall we? Muppet Christmas Carol, I think it knew that it had a lot of remakes, recent remakes of this story to contend with. And the writers, I think, took everything they learned, Muppets being Muppets, from the era of like Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, and then applied it to a period piece. This version knew its assignment, and I don't think it got 100% A. Hello, thank you for the tail hug. I don't think it got 100% A, but gee, it got in the 90s. It got a really nice 93% for a good try in that regard. Also, Michael Caine. A lot of it, I think, is because of how Michael Caine approached acting. You know, there's always that line of how he handles it versus how Tim Curry handles it. One of them often compared just treating the Muppets to being humans. The other approached it to, I am a Muppet. They tried to literally put a soul into the puppeteer's soul is there, but lean into the fact that Kermit is Kermit is Kermit. Or Miss Piggy is Miss Piggy is Miss Piggy. And then we bring up the fact that they played the Cratchits. The scenes with Tiny Tim and the third ghost, I have a hard time watching the Muppet Christmas Carol now that I have lost a child. That dinner scene rips me to shreds now. And it's the only version that lets the somberness of Tim hang in the comedic versions, at least. And it lets it just sit there like a feast as the prelude to the dessert that is Ebenezer contending with the fact that he is not going to have that same experience. And Michael Caine sold that scene in it. Again, Jono from Cinema Therapy and everybody's favorite team of, internet dads from Cinema Therapy often say it's the actor's face being allowed to carry the scene that sometimes is the most powerful moments. Michael Caine, you did us good, dude. So the cons to this, of course, are going to be, it's the Muppets. You have the Muppet quality of things, but then of course there's the fact that you have Gonzo and Rizzo in the movie for the only other reason being that they are narrating this thing. Now, it does harken back to kind of the narrator in the book being his or her own character. Charles Dickens was known for having that kind of voice sometimes. I think the fact that had we removed those two and taken out the comedy, we would have had the Dark Crystal version, the Labyrinth version for sure of this story. And I think they knew what the intersection of their audiences was as Jim Henson Productions at large at this point to kind of make a determined guess on where to land on how dark are we going and how many cookies are we bringing to the party. Speaking of how dark is it and the party, Jim Carrey's version of A Christmas Carol. There's a Jim Carrey, and there's a Jim Carrey, and there's a Jim Carrey, and there's a Jim Carrey featuring Jim Carrey. You want to talk about an actor who did a self-diagnosing study while doing different voices? I give you this version of A Christmas Carol featuring mostly the voice talents of one Jim Carrey. If you look at where this movie landed in his acting career and in his life, you see why this came at a time that he had the right mindset and energy of being at a crossroads himself as an actor to be able to do it. Again, kind of like how Michael Caine made the Muppet version what it is, kind of like how Bill Murray made the Scrooged version of what it is. Jim Carrey's work in this version is kind of what took the uncanny valley of the art, one of the large cons, and made it eventually not so uncanny because of the slight dark comedy. That was well played and probably not intentional, but that's just a testament to Jim Carrey's ability to carry the comedy, dark, light, or somewhere in between. This definitely is going to be one of the most visually, technologically advanced versions, in my opinion, not including some more recent dues of this movie applying. Just because CGI at the time was so new, I think that if you look at behind the scenes things of this movie, they talk about the challenges of the CGI versus what they really intended to want to do. And I think this movie, along with a couple others that came out around that era, Holiday and Not, can be pinpointed as some of the most experimental things they tried to do to get over that uncanny valleyness that CGI still sometimes can, unfortunately, intentionally and not get into. Okay? Now, I would say that a big pro to this one is that there weren't a ton of over-the-top musical numbers. I think it would have made it too similar to Jim Carrey in The Grinch, to give you an actor movie discography comparison, which I'm glad it didn't go the same way, given that Ron Howard directed The Grinch as well as he did to be what it is, in my opinion. Again, took a child story and aged it up, whereas Jim Carrey in A Christmas Carol took a kind of adult story and This is definitely the teenage animated version of this movie because it's one of the more accurate of the animated versions to the plot. And it plays with the fact that the third ghost is the Grim Reaper the hardest. It really lets the music amplify the art. And I like how period accurate that would have been from a performance standpoint, given theater was what it was in Charles Dickens's time. So the cons of this one, if you can't get over the Uncanny Valley one, or if you don't like Jim Carrey's brand of humor, this movie's not going to be your favorite one at all. And probably the fact that this one gets butchered the most for runtime to be turned into a TV-friendly runtime, in my opinion. So there's sometimes movements where the camera angles that are in a full run seamless. For the TV run, they look super jerky, which makes the Uncanny Valley worse. So, of the ones I mentioned, which one's your favorite? What did you learn about being a human from watching any of these at any time in your life? Because really, truly, that's the reason why this story is timeless. Scrooge's journey, the Cratchit's journey, is not one that most societies have been able to find a solution to. And I think this Christmas, a lot of us are having a lot of similar questions to what the Cratchits went through and to the loneliness that Scrooge goes through. So if that's you, you're always welcome here. Take care of yourself. You, your voice, your characters, all facets of them and you matter now more than ever. Happy holidays. Bah humbug not.